introduction. Hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, providing tips on language learning, culture, and human development. And today I'd like to talk about a very relevant topic. I think this ties in well with a recent broadcast with Mesa Adnan from the UAE talking about the qualities of effective teachers. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I think that each one of us, I think if we look back on the years of our teaching, there have been times where we have said things or done things that really have been things that we've later regret. And I think that at times we feel justified in saying things to students, but with deeper reflection, I think we think about that perhaps we could have said things in a better way. We could have been more sensitive to our students. And I certainly count myself as one of those teachers that has perhaps said things that I have later regretted. During the presentation today, I certainly, as I make points, there are 10 points that I'm going to be talking about of things that we should avoid. Feel free to share your own insight, your own advice, your own experience with these type of ideas, that perhaps things that we've said that we could have gone back and said things differently. And I think sometimes we say things to our students and they may be the result of blanket assumptions about students. Often when we tend to homogenize students into the same pot. In other words, we might see students on their smartphone and assume that they're all playing video games. And I think there are times that we overgeneralize. We draw hasty conclusions, sometimes not considering the ramifications of our statements. Now, I'm not saying that we should never correct our students. I'm not saying that we should never hold our students accountable for the things that they say and do. Not at all. I'm simply suggesting that we shouldn't say the first thing that comes to our minds. We should be very careful because some of the things that we say to students may seem harmless on the surface, but they really might create unneeded tension, unneeded embarrassment, and emotional distress that we really don't need to be doing. So why is this topic so important of being careful of what we say and do in conjunction with our students? Well, the French philosopher René Descartes said the following. He said, "The chief cause of human errors is to be found in the prejudices picked up in childhood." In other words, sometimes what we say and what we do echoes in 1,000 ears. And what we say to students stays imprinted on their hearts. It will linger in their minds. And our job is to be as positive to them. Yes, by holding them accountable. Yes, by correcting them, but doing so in a way that supports their emotional and intellectual development. So today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on 10 ideas, 10 statements that we probably should avoid, and things that we should say to students to support them as well. Just a couple of good morning. Marcella, good morning. It's good to see you. Mesa, I hope this topic kind of coincides with what we talked about last week. And Nelson talks about practicing the 4 multiple intelligences in the class. And I think this is connected to that, to the topic as well. And Nayale from Mexico, thank you very much for pointing that out. So let's get right to the statements. And again, as I'm talking about these 10 statements, feel free to chime in. Feel free to share your perspectives on these ideas as well. So number 1, again, weren't you paying attention? Is your smartphone out again? Sometimes I think that, yes, there are times when students do not pay attention in class. But do we ask ourselves why the student wasn't paying attention in that particular moment without rushing to judgment and always assuming the worst? Yes, don't we remember there were times that maybe we had a problem dragging ourselves out of bed and we sat in the class dead as a log, perhaps because we didn't have friends. Perhaps we were being bullied at school or on our way home. Or perhaps a member of our family is sick and we're receiving a flood of text messages talking about and giving us updates on the condition of that particular family member. So what I'm trying to suggest is when students are not paying attention, there could be a reason why. And so maybe we need to ask questions and redirect the student gently back to the lesson, and maybe taking some more time out of our schedule to ask them why. Now, let me be clear. I don't have much sympathy for a student who's trying to contest a speeding ticket. They were driving down the highway at 160 kilometers an hour, and now they're trying to contest the speeding ticket. No, that was their fault, certainly. Or if a student is using their phone to frantically complete a homework assignment with another teacher. No, not at all. No, those cases are completely different. But even in these cases, I think a softer tone will win respect instead of diminishing a student's self-worth by, embarrassing the student in front of their classmates. So I think we can do a lot to help them and redirect them back to the class. So being careful of that. Number 2, you have so much potential. Now, this comment might seem very much a way to motivate students, but there are often times when students feel overwhelmed. Perhaps there are mental health issues, perhaps the stress of taking online classes, perhaps the stresses and family tensions that are going on in their homes. And I know that, I think it was Carol that mentioned I think it was the last episode, that sometimes our classrooms perhaps are the safest learning environments that students experience all day. And so by saying you have so much potential and not realizing the other stressors that they have in their own lives may reinforce in their minds that they are a failure. Maybe they're getting that at home. Maybe they're getting that from their friends. Why can't you live up to your potential? Does not take in consideration the other stresses that are going on. And while we think this might be a way of cheering up students, we might be completely clueless that a 500-kilogram gorilla, right, is sitting figuratively on their chest, not allowing them to breathe. So those stressors are often going on in their lives. Isra says, I think don't say no for any students. Let them discuss their answers. I think allowing students to come up with answers themselves. Don't say no for any student. Allow them to show and talk. Maybe we need more caring, love, and acceptance. Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to address today, of that care and consideration. The next point is this. I never give a perfect score on a test. Well, when I was in high school, I had a chemistry teacher that was very proud that no students in the class could ever achieve, complete mastery, could get an A in the class and so forth. And I think if our goal is to help students to master a concept, shouldn't they be able to achieve mastery? Shouldn't there be times when everyone should be able to get an A on a test? It just seems that sometimes teachers want to beat the idea into the students that they won't be able to achieve mastery. And teachers then become the barriers and roadblock to students' success. Now, I'm not saying that we should never challenge our students. Not at all. I think we should continue to challenge our students in all that they do. But I don't believe that we should allow our ego to get in the way of student success. Provide a path for them to achieve mastery. There's nothing wrong with encouraging students to achieve and to push forward for high marks, but I don't think we should create artificial barriers to them and their success as well. Mesa says, I think teachers can be smart enough to grab the student, the attention of the class by showing them real life role models from their community to get some inspiration. Absolutely. I think Mesa is talking about teacher awareness of how we can motivate students as well. Very good idea. So in addition to this particular point, I'd like to go on to the next. Again, right, you have so much potential. right? No one in my class ever gets a high score. That should never be the case. But the other thing is that the next one, I don't care if students like me or my class. Really? Shouldn't the goal of school be to help students develop healthy emotional relationships with others, including the teacher? I mean, being the role model of healthy human connection is what we should all achieve for. I mean, compassion and empathy and wholehearted living should be the goal of the class. Yes, you should be concerned whether students like you or not, because you're being the role model of that type of healthy relationship is so important. Excuse me. I think teachers can be firm in holding students to high expectations, but yet be caring at the same time. So I think it's really important that students like your class, that they see a model, even when they disagree, even when there are differences of opinion. There should be things that we do to help them see that healthy relationships are possible in all cases. And Nayali says, important to inspire them. Absolutely. And I think we can inspire them in so many ways, by helping them achieve success, by helping them set high goals. Absolutely. By helping them see that you can get a perfect score on a test. Absolutely. Number five. Okay. You're just lazy. Now, the challenge is when you see a student not completing the work, you have to ask yourself, why is that happening? I mean, there are often times where something else is going on beyond our awareness. I know I've shared a little bit about my son, Josh, before, and I'd like to share another thought regarding that because I think it's connected to our own connection with students. Our son, Joshua, had high-functioning autism, and he had OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And he had a level of anxiety that was very much disabling. And I mean, there are times where if you ask a teenager, clean the kitchen, well, they're probably going to do the least amount of work to get the task done. But people that were struggling with OCD and high-functioning autism, sometimes they feel that they need perfection, that they'll labor over the task for hours. And so with Josh, if we told him to clean the kitchen, he expected perfection. He would labor hour after hour. And sometimes it'd just be difficult for him to complete tasks. And I think the same thing happened with him at school, that sometimes to complete tasks, to complete homework, sometimes was just overwhelming. And so fortunately, he did receive academic accommodations to take more time to complete tasks. But there was one case where one teacher didn't really fully understand that importance and just called him lazy. And so why do things happen like that? I think, again, going back to the initial idea that teachers make simplistic assumptions of why students are completing or not completing tasks. I think we just need to be more sensitive to students. Excuse me. We need to be more sensitive to their needs, their own situations. And sometimes teachers barely know their students beyond the walls of their own classrooms. And I think we just need to do more in this particular case. As Rita says, it's important that a teacher gives constructive comment for their mistakes instead of a destructive comment that would indirectly hurt them. Thank you. Absolutely. Sometimes we say things, the first thing that comes to our mind without considering that collateral impact. Thanks, Isarita. Nayali says, we need to be considerate and caring. To do that, we must start by knowing our students and their learning styles. Absolutely. Feel free to share any methods that you know that will help us understand those learning styles. Certainly, excuse me, we can be doing some type of survey at the beginning of class, perhaps asking them questions, but getting to know them. And that might include some of their fears, their concerns about the class as well. Rita says, careless comments about students. Performance is like a simplistic assumption that you have taught us about. So that is when confirmation bias should be avoided. Absolutely. The idea of coming up with simplistic ideas about students is something that we need to avoid. So yes, excuse me, if students are making simplistic, if students are, struggling in the class, rather than coming up with simplistic assumptions of why they're struggling, that they're just lazy, we need to find out more about what is happening to them. The next point is number 6. I had your sister last year and you're nothing like her. Ooh, oh, that would hurt. We have to realize that people are different and the world thrives on diversity. I mean, that's what makes things happen. And even if the sister performed better, it's not our job to reinforce the differences that they had. Not at all. I think making such comments just reinforces the, again, the disparity between the students. And I think it causes unneeded emotional distress. And they probably get that type of comparison from home. I mean, yeah, parents might say, I don't compare my children, but we probably do anyway. And I think teachers saying the same thing, comparing sibling, does nothing to strengthen relationships. It really actually hurts. Rita says, number 6, we must not compare the students. Yeah, abilities in academia. Absolutely. And I think we tend to do that, but we just can't compare students. Excuse me, students within the same classes as well. So great points today. Number 7 is, right? I know what students are like from your country. Well, you know what? Such a statement should never be used. And to me, it's a huge warning light, right? That signals our own biases and our discriminatory practices. I mean, to throw students into the same pot and label them is to really cause, I think, emotional harm, because we're seeing students, all students from your country think this way. Now think about it. Think about the types of stereotypes that people come up about you, about people from your country. And I think no one likes to be branded like this, to seen in the same way. Yes, there are differences that exist between cultures. But if you look more carefully, I think you will find two people from the same country that have polar opposite views. And I think that we have to be aware of that. I think coming up with these hasty conclusions, simplistic assumptions, does not allow us to understand the person right in front of us that is standing right before us. I think that is important. Mesa says should be some type of continuous communication between teachers and parents should be honest with school in displaying all of the difficulties and problems that their children have, especially those related to disabilities. Yes, that type of communication must go on, should go on. And Rita says, we need to learn about the culture and different upbringing of students from different countries. Yes, I think there could be some universal principles or ideas that represent a particular culture, but to say everyone from your culture, it's kind of like saying, oh yeah, I know students from your country, you don't like doing homework. Oh, that type of comment can really be damaging. Yes, there are differences, but I think we need to be very careful in what we say and what we do in that regard. Just labeling, throwing everyone into the same pot is just not good practice. Number 8, my other class did better on the quiz than you guys. Now, I know there are certain times when we'd like to try to motivate students, like in some type of game and so forth. But I think we need to be very careful, because sometimes what students might feel is they might see that view, that comment, the other class did a lot better than you do. I mean, who wants to be viewed as second rate? Yes, I think we can motivate students do some type of competition, but only with the right tone and demeanor. So yes, the other class did better, but we have to be very careful, because I think, once again, in the students' minds, they see and they might feel that they're being viewed as second rate, that they're not as good as someone else. And I think we have to be careful in the way that we use games in such activities. Absolutely. Here we go. Number 9. All right. When I was your age, anytime a teacher or parent uses this expression, when I was your age, kids tend to roll their eyes, and I think they mentally entrench in bunkers of safety because they don't know what is coming next. They think that, oh no, here comes another lecture. Yes, your time period was different than theirs, but your time period is over. It might not even be relevant to the student's situation. So anytime you say, when I was your age, that can really create emotional distance between your students, because they think that you're just going to come up with some lecture. Rita says, quiz is just for fun to motivate them to learn better using this tool. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are times when we can motivate students, even comparisons slightly, but I think it comes down with the way in which we say it, the actual demeanor of what we say. And I think one of my favorite proverbs is this: do not confine your children to your own learning, for they were born in another time. Again, do not confine your children to your own learning, for they were born in another time. We're dealing with differences. Yeah, your time in a way is over, but they are dealing with different challenges, a different world, a different system, and we need to be sensitive to those comments as well. Rita says, I do that sometimes. Haha. Yeah, I think we all do that. I mean, if you ask my children, they would say the same thing. So remember, the things that I'm saying are things that I have done and perhaps continue to done unconsciously. I just have to be aware that my time and their time are different. And sometimes we often use this with competing sympathies. I know how you feel, when in reality, we absolutely have no idea how people feel in so many different ways. Great. Here we go. Number 10. And I think this is one of my favorites. I'm the teacher, you're not. And there was an example I'd like to illustrate that. When I was in high school taking Spanish, I remember a few years ago, my children were asking their grandfather, what was my father like when he was in high school? And I started to think, oh no, don't remember that experience. Don't remember that. And my father said, you know what? I couldn't have asked for a better son, except for that one time I got a note from the high school teacher. And I'm thinking, oh, and this is what happened. When I was in high school, I was studying Spanish. The teacher was terrible because the teacher only spoke Spanish. And of course, that's supposed to be a good thing. At the time, I didn't realize it, but there was a time when the teacher was actually, me and another student were reading a dialogue in front of the class. It was like, hi, what is your name? My name is Randall. Where are you from? And so forth. A simplistic dialogue. At the end of the dialogue, the teacher said, Johnny, you got a 7.5. And Randy, you got a 7. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, what is the difference between a 7.5 and a 7? And I asked the teacher, what is the difference between a 7.5 and a 7? Or an 8.5 and an 8? And often as teachers, we use the same scales. And the teacher said, Randy, listen, I've been teaching for 40 years, and I know what the difference is. And I said, and this was before I knew the words like rubric and grading scale. And I started pressing and I started pushing. And the teacher said, if you don't stop, I'm going to send a note home to your family. It was a valid question that I had. I was probably pushing a little bit too much, but it was a valid question because in reality, I don't think the teacher could explain it. And the teacher said, I'm the teacher, you're not. How many times in our own classes do we come with grading systems or activities where a student is pointing out a valid concern, a valid idea. Maybe we're making a mistake in our instruction. Maybe the test has too many items. Maybe we're demanding too much from the students. And rather than saying, you know what, you might be right, we impose, I'm the teacher and you are not. And so the teacher wrote a message, it came home, and my dad still remembers that. I think I had a valid point. Maybe the tone in which I was asking it was not the best, but the teacher imposing, I'm the teacher and I'm control and I will decide, is not always the best way. I think what we need to do is do a little bit more listening. A couple of more comments. Rita says, we are of a different generation, but there is something we can share that would motivate them. Absolutely, Rita. I think that's a really good point. And yes, we don't always have to dismiss the idea that, well, when I was your age. No, I think there can be, as Rita is mentioning, there can be things from our own experience that is relevant to students. And I think we just need to be sure in the tone at which we say those is important. Rita also says, teachers can earn respect from students if they respect them first as a first step to building connection and mutual respect for each other. Absolutely. I think the idea of mutual respect, but I think that sometimes we do things from a position of power. You need to do this is not the best way. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we afraid that our fragile egos will break if a student points out a problem, a valid concern? And I think we just need to be open to listening to our students better. Well, those are 10 different points that talking about reinforcing. Feel free to share any other comments regarding any of these other points. I'm talking about things that teachers shouldn't say to their students, or perhaps should be careful in saying in developing that relationship. What I'd like to do to finalize the episode today is talk about 5 things that perhaps we should say. Here we go. And before we get to, I'm just looking at some in the other. Maria says, good morning. I always make agreements with the students at the beginning of class, and it works. So establishing an understanding, I think, is important, because I think a lot of students would say, I didn't know that. You weren't clear. And then we come back and say, well, I thought I was clear. And that doesn't help at all. So Maria, I think expectations are important. Maria says, such as the agenda of that class. Yeah, what is the goal? Sometimes we come up with, hey, I'm your teacher and I'm going to be teaching this, but sometimes we're not very clear on the expectation. It's kind of like, imagine a lake and you and your students are standing on a dock. You cannot see the other side of the lake because there is this thick fog, and you tell students, jump in and swim, and they have no idea how far they need to swim. In the same way, we need to set up clear expectations. An agenda is so important as well. Great. So those are important comments too. So thank you for making that comment. So let's talk. Let's talk about 5 things that I think are important that we can say. Again, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, talking about ideas that things that teachers should not say to their students in the classroom. I've talked about, yes, we need to hold students accountable for those things, but we just need to be careful in the tone and demeanor in which we might say those. Feel free to share any of your other comments. So here we go. Here are 5 things that we probably should be saying to our students. And again, feel free to share any of your ideas as well. Number 1, how are you today? And then listen. I think there are many students that are stepping into the classroom. As mentioned before, I think there are times when they're coming from unstable home environments. Maybe they were bullied on the way to school, and they don't want some type of simplistic, hey, how are you today? And then for us to rush on to the ideas of the class. Be sure to ask, how are you today? And then listen and listen some more, because I think the goal of listening is to allow people to suffer less and heal. So when you say, how are you today? We should truly mean it. Number 2, right? I'm sorry. and then apologize for mistakes. I think sometimes we're so concerned about our own ego that we are afraid to say when we made mistakes. Even let's say that we had a class yesterday, we said something in class, maybe about the grammar, we weren't clear, we made a mistake in the presentation. There's nothing wrong with going back and saying, yesterday, to be honest, I made a mistake in the class and I want to correct it. I think what students see opening up and being vulnerable to our own mistakes shows that we are truly human, that we are just like them, constantly making mistakes and struggling. Israel says all students love to share their feelings with their favorite teachers. Yes, and I think that sometimes being vulnerable to our own mistakes and our own situations allows students to open up as well. So again, number one was yes, being honest and open and listening to their feelings and apologizing. Number three, saying something like thank you for sharing. And I think, Isra, that's what you were saying too, is opening up. Thanks for sharing. That must have been difficult to talk about. And thanks for being open and honest about that. Acknowledging that you enjoy hearing from students, that you enjoy hearing their struggles as well. The next one is very similar, is that must be difficult. Whether it was with language learning, whether it's with their struggles in a different class, whether it be with struggles at home, validating the struggle. And when I'm talking about teachers too, I think there are many times when teachers too are struggling in their classes, but don't want to be viewed by fellow teachers as less than. I think we need to be open to say, I had a lesson today. It didn't go very well. What ideas do you have? And I think being open to expressing our fears and our concerns, even among teachers, I think is really important. But I think if a student says, I'm really concerned about failing this class, yes, that feeling must be difficult. It's not just simply saying, well, just work harder. You just need to study more, which can be true. But we need to be very careful in the way that we say things, I think is important too. Ellie says, hello from Puerto Rico. At times, I allow my students to participate in structuring a test by allowing them to decide what they would like for me to evaluate on the test. They usually surprise me by choosing the most difficult skills. Ellie, this is such an important point. I think this is great, by allowing students to be part of the evaluation process, because then what it signals to the students is that your ideas matter, your feelings matter. And I think there is greater buy-in when students say, you know what, I had part in deciding the questions on the test. And rather than choosing the easiest items, they might choose the items that are most relevant to them. Sometimes, as a teacher, I think there was a period of time where a student would ask, what's on the test? And I would say something like, wouldn't you like to know? No, surprises are wonderful. Birthday surprises, government's giving a tax rebate. Well, that's a wonderful surprise. But tests, those should never be surprises to students. I mean, students should understand the construct, how the test will be designed, not necessarily the items on the test, but what you will be assessing, I think is really important. Mesa says, I think all of the points you mentioned have something to do with mutual respect between a teacher and the student, because there is a good and friendly relation. If there is a good and friendly relationship, teachers won't need to instruct a lot and give commands. You won't have to say, do this and do this, because the expectations are already set. Great. Students can know what their teacher prefers and what he hates. And it is very important to give a space for students to express themselves clearly. Absolutely. And I think all of these ideas that we've talked about today revolve around mutual respect, revolve around being sincere, revolve around a proper tone and demeanor in everything that we do. Excellent point. And the last point that I want to mention today is this: take your time. So many times, whether it be in tests, whether it be in their sharing their feelings, whether it be in just processing things, I think we need to accommodate students better. I think we need to understand that their struggles, taking homework, doing homework takes time as well, to be sensitive to their needs. Again, going back to all of these principles, I'm not suggesting that we should not hold students accountable for any mistakes that they make. Absolutely not. But I think we're talking about in the demeanor, in the tone that we say things, I think will heighten our human connection with them. I think it will improve the relationship that we have with them as well. And I think the same principles, all of these principles, apply to the relationship that teachers have with one another, apply to relationships outside of school. And as I mentioned at the beginning, what we say and what we do with students echoes in 1,000 years, and creating a meaningful relationship in the classroom, a safe learning environment, not as just about our classroom, but it will apply to where they work in the future. It applies to also family life and connecting with others as well. So I want to thank you very much for joining this presentation on the 10 things that we probably should not say when we open our mouth. And I think the idea for me is do not say the first thing that comes to your mind. Also reflect. It's the concept of mindfulness, of being self-aware of the things that we say and do can have a great impact on others as well. So I just want to thank you for joining the broadcast today. Feel free to share comments, ideas after the broadcast is over that is related to this particular topic. I look forward to seeing you again in another